Yeah, I mean, for me, it's still traumatic to. Obviously, I've met really good police officers, but I've no matter how good a police officer is, they can never erase all the trauma from growing up in Chicago.
Well, that's interesting that there's racism down in Mexico against people of the same race. So, in a way, it's not racism, but they're calling it racism, but they're the same race.
Hmm.
But it's very interesting how that mindset is there. They're the same race, but the mindset is there of being a lesser being because of having darker skin.
Hmm.
So, it's really hard to say that maybe at the core of our being that racism isn't always about race. A lot of it is just about making yourself superior to someone else based on their looks. This is a very far-fetched idea. I mean, I'm going off the charts here, but I mean, based on the fact that like Mexico has racism against their own race based on the color of the skin, I find that very interesting. Going off of that subject, I want to bring up the book Whiteness as Property by Cheryl Harris. And in this book, it talks about slavery as a legal institution. She even states such on page 1720 of her book and describes how slaves were being transferred, assigned, inherited, essentially used as currency. And that falls in the same category of losing their rights. I mean, they were just property at that point.
Hmm.
They lost all of their rights. Do you feel like this idea of owning people, not to the extreme that it was back then, but like nowadays, owning people, do you feel like that's still going on in today's legal system?
Yeah, I think it is. I think if you look at the prison system, I think there's I always I hear this a lot where uh people are talking about how they need to, they fill the beds. They need warm bodies for the beds that are in the prisons. It's just the people in the prison system are the ones that are saying this. It's just so disheartening because it really opens your eyes to what the prison system is actually seeking, because it's supposed to be a reform system, but it's when people are talking about it like, oh yeah, I have 10,000 beds that I need to fill. I can fit 20,000 inmates in my prison, but I only have 10,000. I need to find 10,000 to put in here. And it definitely goes right back to the whole owning people. You're looking at them as your property, that like a object that you need to put on your shelf. Oh, my shelf is empty. I need to fill my shelf up.
Yeah, definitely. And that same topic of you talking about the prisons and how they're not working, Angela Davis actually talks about that in her book, Are Prisons Obsolete, where she touches on quite a few things about prisons as far as how they treat women in the prison system, how they treat African Americans. And I thought one of her biggest points that she made in that book was talking about the imprisonment and reform structure of the prisons. Because originally the prisons were set up to have a system where people could educate themselves, get themselves ready for like the outside world. This was especially difficult for African Americans who were in the prison system because they were already struggling with racism, going in the
Hmm.
prison system and whatnot. But they took away programs that would help them getting an education. Like, so for example, they took away grants out of the prison system. At one point, they were limiting how much like books they could read, how much knowledge they could access in the prison system.
Hmm.
And then on top of that, they were dealing with a bunch of racism. So, following through with that statement that you made earlier about prisons, do you also feel like they're obsolete? And do you feel like they're, in a sense, using slavery, the idea of slavery in the prison system?
I think so. Just take for example the California fires that happened. A lot of the firefighters were prisoners. They were paid dimes essentially. The roads in California are built by prisoners. Like there's there's a lot of labor that needs to get done that prisoners are doing, and it it sucks because if those people get out, they can't even find a job in the same thing that they were already doing professionally within the prison system. So it's not a reform because you teach this person the skill, but when they get out, they're not even allowed to do the thing that they were already doing in prison. So I don't think that the prison system is actually working. I think the intent was there, but I feel there's been a lot of corruption and a lot of selling of prison labor. It's forced labor. That's what it is. It's just they're stuck there. They have no other option. So you're kind of forcing them to do the work.
Yeah, definitely. And then, taking away all these opportunities for people inside the prison system to actually become better people allows them not to have to go back in the prison system again. So when you have African Americans who are already struggling with law enforcement, struggling with trying to understand the legal system, and on top of that, racism from police officers, and then they go in the prison system, right? And now they're criminals. They don't have anything to educate themselves, anything to make themselves, better functioning people of society. They go right back out of the prison system. They get tangled with the criminal law again. They have criminal behaviors that have never been restructured or corrected. So they
Yeah.
go back in society. They commit more crimes because what else are you going to do? Like the system's set up against you, right? So you're going to commit more crimes. How are you going to feed yourself? Well, I'm going to commit a crime and get money that way. And it's like a cycle because then law officers are having to deal with them, and then they become racist essentially, or they become prejudiced against African American individuals or minorities or whatnot who have to commit all these crimes because they're struggling. So it's just like this vicious cycle of just continuous racism, stereotyping, crime, prison, no reform, coming back out, having to commit another crime again,
Yeah.
which just furthers it along. And to even branch out further about legal rights and the law enforcement, there's a book called Erasing the Fourth Amendment by Devin Carbado, and he discusses the mistreatment of legal rights by law enforcement of African American communities. Whenever I read his book, hear and read the statements that he's making about his experience with the law enforcement, it makes me remember that time where I got pulled over by the cop. And I just remember like you being so terrified of the cop pulling me over, where I was like, it's fine. I'm like, we'll get through this. Like, it sucks, but I'll get my ticket and I'll move on. But I just remember you being so terrified and just not panicked, but I could definitely feel like the nervous energy coming off of you to the point where I held your hand. And of course, then we got through it and it ended up being just fine. But there was that worry, that instinctual nervousness that you had inside you from your time in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's still traumatic to. Obviously, I've met really good police officers, but I've no matter it, no matter how good a police officer is, they can never erase all the trauma from growing up in Chicago. Like it's a flip of a coin. First of all, it's a flip of a coin if the officer is gonna come up to you, uh, just guns blazing, or he's gonna actually walk up to you and be cordial. And then even if the officer is cordial, it's flip of a coin again if he's just gonna flip his lid and lose it on you. So it's still uh I just there's nothing a police officer could do. There's no amount of reform that could ever happen that is gonna erase all those years of traumatic experiences that I did have with officers because I was a child. I was underage, and not every experience that I had with them was bad. But when the majority of them are bad, it creates this instinct that it's gonna be bad. Whatever is about to happen, it's gonna be bad. And yeah, I don't trust police officers, but I understand why we need them, and I trust that they're gonna do their job. But I know that there are some that are not gonna do their job, and some that have malice. it's complicated. It's a very, very complicated relationship that uh, that people of color have with police officers. Even police officers who are not Caucasian. They just because they have the badge and because they're associated with the police, they're all automatically untrustworthy.
Yeah, that's another conversation that we can talk about next time. Next time we do a podcast, we can talk about this, because that was some of the argument that I brought up before, where social class and title then comes into play rather than racism. So there's a lot of racism, that's around the world, but there's also other factors that contribute to all the issues with racism, poverty, struggles with law enforcement. And a lot of it also depends not just on race, but also on what's your social class. How high up are you on the government chain? How wealthy are you? There's a lot of other factors that come into play. So next time we do a podcast, I'll have to talk about that. But the final statements that I wanna talk about is: do you feel like there's hope for change? Do you feel like things have gotten better, worse? Where do you feel like, now that you've experienced your time in Chicago, you joined the military, now you're out of the military? We live in Washington, which is a pretty easygoing state for the most part. How do you feel about the state of America right now, and do you have hopes for the future?
I do have hope for the future. From growing up, a lot of the conversations that we're having now about race weren't happening when I was growing up. They're just things that that Black people had to deal with, and then it's not even just stopping at Black people; it's going to other people too. And for example, Asian people. Asian people were always looked at as they were second to Caucasian. They were kind of treated like a punching bag. You can make fun of Asian people. You can say whatever you want about Asian people, and nobody really cared. But now it's starting to change, and people are starting, hey, why are we attacking Asian people? That's not right. The biggest thing that I think has changed is people have actually spoken up now. It's not just people don't sit down and just take it, but then also people that are directly affected by it are also speaking out. Yeah, I think things are gonna go well.
I think so as well. I think they're gonna go well as well.
Well, that's great.